कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी यादों में बरसातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें। मन की गहरी झील में कूद जाती हैं कभी, सोच के दरिया के संग संग बहती जाती हैं कभी। चाहे शाम हो या हो रातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें।
In a country like ours, where cricket is the predominant religion, every other person is an ardent cricket devotee. And we have such three devotees on our program who've decided to write about cricket in three different streams, and they make for an interesting mix on our program. We are delighted to introduce you to Rahul Bhattacharya, Vaibhav Vats, and Pramesh Ratnakar. Hello. Welcome to the program, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Now, writing about cricketing, Rahul, let's start with you. How did this happen?
To be absolutely honest, I didn't know what to do after college. And it felt quite miraculous to me that I even cleared those final exams. I think I graduated in pure mathematics, and clearly that was not the line I was intending to pursue any sort of further studies or anything. And at that time there was a new cricket magazine in the market, and so maybe a couple of weeks after my final exams I wrote a letter to the editor with an awful article. I think it was about Courtney Walsh, because he had just broken the world record or something. And you know, in this very sort of heavy purple prose and overwritten piece, and I submitted it to him. But somehow or the other, I guess he was impressed by my enthusiasm, and he summoned me for an interview, and I came, and then I was working basically a few days after my final exams. And I mean, of course, beneath all of that was a very serious passion. I won't even call it a passion. It was just so obvious that cricket is like one of the most important things in life. And growing up, that seemed apparent to me, whether it was watching, playing, reading. So it just felt like the natural thing to do at that point of time for me.
Vaibhav, what about you? Was cricket the most important thing in your life?
Well, for a while. In fact, in the prologue to my book, I talk about how I sort of cricket was like the biggest event of our life until about we were 15, 16. But then I kind of moved away for 6 or 7 years when I went to university and became. In Delhi University, became very politicized, and politics and literature seemed much more important, and cricket sort of faded into the background. And I write about how sort of I got back into cricket writing and cricket, but the second time was as a critic and more as an observer than as a pure fan. So my return was more in terms of to analyze and think about what my childhood had been about. And even when I started journalism, my first 2 jobs were at the Indian Express and Tehelta, and in neither of those places I covered cricket purely, but it was always there. I wanted to write about it. It's one of those things that I wanted to do before. I mean, I would regret if I did not do it. I think let me put it that way.
Pramesh, your book of all the three is the most different. It's a philosophical journey, and it brings in the Vedas and what all. And it's not pure cricket, is it?
Definitely not pure cricket. Actually, what I wanted to do, the basic reason why I wrote that book was, I would in literary terms put it in utopianist literary category, literature. Basically in this book there is a section where I have solved all the problems of the world. No more wars, perfect equality, no problems of language, no problems of lawlessness, all the problems solved carefully and meticulously in a paragraph each. And the book ends with that kind of world actually coming into being. But now I needed somebody, a superhero as it were, to get the ideas and the word going for this kind of transformation. So I decided the superhero has to be you, the reader. And then the whole equation that I sort of created in my head, and which helped me to write the book, and it just sort of flew and it just got itself written as it were, was basically this sort of equation. Sorry, mathematical term.
It's a nice way to convert it, because cricket is where we use maths the most, no?
Yeah. The equation was that what if you were Sachin? That's easy. But what if Sachin were you? then what happens? So once I had got that going, then in this book, the reader is actually the author of the book, and the reader is made into Sachin Tendulkar. And then the book gets written
So
on
each
its own.
reader becomes a vicarious god.
Each reader becomes a vicarious god, and that vicarious god has to transform and learn and get educated. And in this book, the god of cricket, which is Sachin, becomes the god of right cognition. And once he becomes the god of right cognition, he is the one who's able to deal with these ideas which are transforming the world and changing the world and everything else. And one idea I'd like to talk about, how to remove all the wars from the planet in one evening. That's there in the book. So
did you sort out the price of onions as well?
That's a difficult one.
Not even the god of cricket can do that, huh?
Yeah, that would be difficult for anybody, I think. But yeah, the inflation would disappear from. There's a whole paragraph which takes care of
whether
inflation
onions or not, it's all taken care of.
But onions are a different kettle of fish, as it were.
Yeah,
so
but
that's how it goes.
for a team that really knew its onions, was around the time when you wrote your book or the tour that you covered. That was utopian in its own way, because there was great bonhomie between India and Pakistan at around that time, which came after a long hiatus of not playing with each other and things like that.
Yeah, well, the tour that I've written, pundits from Pakistan, is on the early 2004 tour, which was the first big tour a full tour by India in 15 years. And like you say, it came at sort of the crest of several movements. One of those, as you mentioned, was the team itself. There was something about Sourav Ganguly's team at that point in Indian cricket history, which was very, very magnetic and very, very inspiring in a genuine way, not in a sort of package corporate kind of way, like here is the team. It was a team which sort of pulled itself up from the dark days of match fixing, etc. And it had players of great flair and variety, and they had this sort of a spirit which people who've observed Indian cricket for many decades hadn't thought it possible for an Indian team to sort of carry that kind of fighting spirit onto the field. They were seen as a team which was easily defeated.
Around 2004, the phase before that, things were not quite the same.
Yeah. No, I mean, I take your point about 71 and Gavaskar and the Twin Tour wins and all of that. But I think this team, Saurav's team, was the first time we were perhaps consistently the first among the top 2 or 3 teams in the world for a period of 4 or 5 or 6 years.
And there was a variety and flair, like you rightly pointed,
Yeah.
and a sort of confidence which was very enriching.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a certain
entertaining.
panache, there was a certain arrogance to the team, a certain fieriness, a feisty team that had come together after a long time. They hadn't reached that point of being dull and sedate, was it?
Not
the
at all,
previous
because they
teams, the
all
ones
were
you're
at the
talking-
peak of their careers. They
Yeah.
were between, the seniors, to use the Indian term for it, were basically between 28 and 32.
Exactly.
And the younger players were in their early 20s. And so it was like a sort of very young and confident team, and it had energies from, it had like the South Indian sort of analytical seriousness of a Kumble or a Dravid, to go with like the brashness of Harbhajan Singh or Yuvraj Singh.
Right.
Saurav, who's like Dada at the top, and you know, who's taking pangas with everybody, and in some way protecting, because he attracted so much of everything to himself. He was able to sort of shelter a lot of the more sober people.
And
in
also
his
take
team.
sledging on the chin and not get cowed by it and things
Yeah,
like
all
that.
of that.
And give it right back as well.
Yeah, and of course we had the God of Gods, Sachin,
Yeah.
all of that. But I want to say the other thing which was also that you alluded to on that tour was the obvious crest in this India-Pakistan relationship, which was which is a thing you see maybe every now and then in the cycles of the two nations, where there's like a genuine belief that we can overcome this thing which is between us.
Right.
And it goes, well, of course, it must start from the political process, and there was one at that time. There seemed to be sort of seriousness on both sides of the border to engage in political dialogue. But with that comes a sort of people's movement. And that cricket tour allowed this to happen. Because this is what people outside don't often realize about India and Pakistan, that you can't go there, that you're not allowed to go there. Your visa would be pretty much rejected. unless maybe it's a business visa, and those opportunities are very few. Or even if you do get a visa, it'll be restricted time-wise for a few days to 1 or 2 instances. So to be able to go into Pakistan, 11,000 Indians, for a period of 5 weeks, for the media to be beaming back those pictures, stories of reunions, stories of people finding ancestral's house, just the stories of warmth and hospitality around this sort of central combative arena, which is cricket. But it is combative at one level, at the other level is also sort of humanizing. That I think it was a genuinely sort of optimistic moment for the subcontinent.
And also between the teams, you had Wasim giving tips to the Indian bowlers.
He's very good about that. He said that as cricketers ought to be, that this is not about national boundaries. You know, the sport is the sport, craft is craft. And they go beyond borders.
And the hospitality theme was a huge thing during the tour. The kind of hospitality which Indians in the team got from Pakistan, that kept coming through. I mean,
it was except for people who had already been to Pakistan and knew that this would happen, everybody else was shocked. They said that we've never been treated so well anywhere in the world. And so it was a genuinely moving experience.
The other extremely moving experience, of course, was the World Cup, Vaibhav. And you've written about that.
No, I would just like to carry on from what Rahul was saying, because what he was talking about Ganguly's team, it was a new team, a team that was not diffident. And I think by the time the World Cup came around, we had sort of taken this for granted. I mean, I remember this lovely image when the Indian team was doing the lap of the Wankhede with the World Cup. And I remember Ganguly standing in, in his commentator's suit and just watching. And he had sort of laid the roots for, this kind of defiant sort of, a team that kind of gives back as much as it gets, and is sort of unafraid to seize the moment. So that was obviously one of the moving stories.
He said in the Sachin test right now, Sachin's last test, that he had been asked to be on the other side of the ground for the post-match comments. But he said, no, this is the World Cup. He said, no, I want to be on the other side because I just want to see these boys and what it means to lift the World Cup.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was definitely one of the
that
great...
kind of passion is kind of incredible.
I mean, that was one of the great sporting stories. I mean, I had actually gone traveling for the book, I mean, without actually ever thinking that India is going to win it. That was not in my psyche. And then suddenly you see this kind of amazing, almost like, narrative that's taking shape, from like the quarterfinal onwards, where, and there's India-Pakistan again in the semi-final, which is another very emotive game. So that was definitely one of the narratives. The other thing I was interested in exploring was, the last book of this kind had been done was about 96, War Minds the Shooting. But it basically looked at when sort of the subcontinent was sort of emerging into the modern world, into the modern economy, and it had some sort of its downsides, this kind of fundamentalism that was taking shape. And I wanted to explore what it meant to, what the subcontinent was like in 2011. And I think one of the insights that I sort of came back with was that it was a time of immense optimism. It was a time of immense sort of utopia almost. I mean, I went to this constituency in Sri Lanka, which is Rajapaksa's constituency, which is completely sort of, being taken over and reshaped and sort of almost violently hurled into the modern world.
Right.
And I think you felt that utopia even in, after the World Cup win, where, there's this kind of triumphalism, and which I actually, when I write about it, then it was misplaced. It's almost the last sort of surge of optimism that we had. I mean, I can't remember any other moment since the World Cup win. I mean, we've just felt worse and worse about ourselves ever since then.
I want to ask you, Pramesh, now that Sachin has retired, do you think Gita comes into play again as it does in your book? Because 4 days later, you have the young kid who scores the 3rd highest in cricket history.
So I think Sachin has a unique place in the world of cricket now, and he's obviously, he has it over because he's conducted himself in a certain way all through his career. And in my book, which is called The Father, the Son and the Spirit of Cricket, actually the real hero is his father. Because I have given the entire credit for who Sachin is and what Sachin is to his dad. And in fact, even the World Cup victory in my novel, because in a novel you are a king, you can do what you want to. Even the World Cup victory, I have given the credit to Sachin's dad in a certain way.
In fact, ironically, you've never met Sachin. You haven't done much research about his life, have you?
I've never met him. I have just used everything from the net and so on, and for my own watching of cricket as I've gone along. I've never interviewed him or talked to him or anything, because I mean I am in academics, so I've been I mean, I'm a sportsman who strayed into academics, so I've been reading more than actually going and meeting and traveling like you guys have done. So that was
No, just as well. It gives you more latitude to imagine him.
that's true. And I very, very quickly, just a couple of things about Sachin and his last speech, when the way the book has, I wrote it a couple of years back, and then things have happened, and then he said things in the book, in his last speech, which was which was kind of close to what I had done in the book, so I was feeling very good about that in a certain sense.
So do you think it was prophetic somewhere, what you wrote?
I was, for example, in my book I've said that whenever Sachin raises his bat to the skies, and that's why the blue sky is there in the cover, he's actually thanking his father.
Yes, and he acknowledged it in his speech.
And so this book I had already thought of this on my own.
But the interesting thing about that is that after he started doing it, every other Indian cricketer started doing it, acknowledging Sachin's father.
Maybe they're not doing it to Sachin's father. But the other thing which is very interesting, which in my book I've said, that Sachin's greatest contribution to Indian cricket is not his hundreds, but the fact that when he became the father figure in the team, Sachin Paji, he gave to the youngsters what his father had given him, the freedom to express himself. And that freedom is what Dhoni and the young Turks are experiencing and are being able to use and work with and so on. So he has set high standards, and yet those standards are not oppressive in a certain sense. They are not the kind of things which some of the earlier senior cricketers were able to do. So that kind of a mindset is coming from a very deeper understanding of what the game is all about and what life is all about, and that is what we need to appreciate about Sachin. And I think
and also for Sachin, the love of cricket is paramount. There are no egos. He's quite happy talking to the youngsters, advising them, being one with them, equal to them. That was the beauty of Sachin.
That is what I'm trying to say. The whole understanding. The love of cricket has to be love of life in a fundamentally joyous sense of the word. Otherwise, what else is cricket? What else is a game, and what else is a sport? If you're not celebrating life in a sport, and that's why I find a certain kind of discourse which is happening across cricket very disturbing. This whole business of fiery, this whole business of saying we have to beat the shit out of everybody else, and if we are not beating them, then we are not good enough. And this whole idea that the Indian team is now more fiery than it was earlier, and earlier we were. We were wishy-washy and we were not in the face kind of a thing. We don't have to be like that. I mean,
but now things have changed. It's a different cricketing world now, isn't it?
I find that disturbing. I find that very disturbing and most of the time it looks like play acting.
It's no longer a gentleman's game.
But I think that's also maybe a slightly narrow interpretation of it, because when you see a fight, it need not necessarily be verbally aggressive or body pantomime posturing.
Look at what's going on in the field everywhere.
That of course,
in Australia,
but I think what maybe the comparison between Saurav and Dhoni's teams versus Indian teams of the past is not about body language alone, isn't it? It's about.
I'll quickly say something about Saurav's team. The way I look at that, because that is a transforming moment, as it were. I think the Saurav's team was able to be confident without that kind of aggression, which is now play acting and so on and so forth going on, precisely because they were able to, as you very rightly put, the diversity that was there in the team, everyone was able to come together, and that generated a kind of confidence in each other. Sehwag, Dravid, Ganguly, Lakshman, all different people, Kumble, and yet they were fully themselves and they were able to energize each other in that kind of a way. They didn't have to go.
That's true. And Dhoni's got his own very different style of leadership. You saw you watched his team win the World Cup.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Also, I think just going back to Sachin, I was there at his last Test match, and I think, I was just sharing with Rahul that, it's. I don't think we'll ever see anything like that. The press box, which is usually the most insular and the most sort of, place that is not emotional at all at any moment in the game. To see senior journalists breaking down,
not
crying.
A single dry eye in the entire stadium.
The stadium, that's happened before, but the press box has always been insulated. Even when we won the World Cup, we were very, very normal.
But this was everybody weeping for their
people
lost childhood.
Senior 50-year-old journalists who've been covering the sport for 30, 40 years, crying. So that was unprecedented. And I think in some ways, Sachin, is different even from Rahul and Lakshman and Saurav, because I think he came at a time where India was still vulnerable. We were still part of we were just arriving into the modern world. And I think, say until '96, we were still a very mediocre team and also had a deep sense of mediocrity as a country. And I think Sachin in that sense sort of represented a sort of excellence and a sort of self-belief. And I think which is why he's sort of different I mean, his impact, his significance emotionally, I think we can talk about the statistics, is different from the rest. I think, and I think the going away of Sachin and the kind of sort of hyperbole around his retirement is also based to the idea that we're losing a sort of innocence that we had. I think cricket now has become too slick. It's very difficult for people who cover the sport even now to really feel very strongly for some of the cricketers, because it's so mediated, it's so slick, and it's also very uniform. I mean, one of the sad parts of the the aggressive Indian team is that all of them are more or less aggressive. All of them have more or less sort of come under an umbrella, have a uniform personality. You don't see the kind of variety that Rahul was talking about, with Lakshman, sort of with the sedate kind of, playing style, and then Sehwag, who's all sort of guns blazing. So I think it's become a much more uniform team, and I think it's hard to sort of, we don't have the same variety that we had.
But that said, I think it's also an exciting period in terms of where these players are now coming from. And
that's a wonderful thing, actually.
Yeah, I mean, you see a story like Mohammad Shami.
Yeah.
From poor family in Uttar Pradesh. I think is he a son of a labourer? I think I read in a piece, and who then went to Calcutta.
And that began from Ganguly's time in a certain sense, with people like Sehwag and everybody coming.
What is so wonderful about the game of cricket is that no matter which era we discuss and no matter which future we go towards, it's always going to be exciting, and there's always going to be a new discussion that will take place. But for now, I want to thank you all for being on the program and for talking about your books, and I hope a lot of people see these books and read them. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
ये मेरा एक संग्रह है सुबह के इंतज़ार में। इसमें से मैं एक कविता है आदिवासी लड़की। आदिवासी युवती पर वो तुम्हारी चर्चित कविता क्या खूबसूरत पंक्तियां हैं। एक टिप्पणी है कवि पर, वो भद्र कवि पर जो आदिवासी को अपने चश्मे से देखता है। आदिवासी युवती पर वो तुम्हारी चर्चित कविता क्या खूबसूरत पंक्तियां हैं। गोल गोल गाल, उन्नत उरोज, गहरी नाभि, पुष्ट जंगाहें, मदमाता यौवन। यह भी तो कि नायिका कविता की स्वयं में संपूर्ण कविता, जो हुआ साकार तन में प्रकृति का सौंदर्य सारा, रूप से मधु झर रहा एवं सुगंधित पवन उससे। आहा, क्या कहना कवि तुम्हारे सौंदर्य बोध का। अब इन परिकल्पित ऊंचाइयों पर स्वप्निल भाव तरंगों के साथ उड़ते कलात्मक शब्द यान से नीचे उतरकर चलो उस अंचल में जहाँ रहती है वो आदिवासी युवती। वाह, देखो गौर से उस लड़की को जिसके गोल गोल गालों के ऊपर ललाट है, जिसके पीछे दिमाग है, दिमाग की कोशिकाओं पर टेढ़ी मेढ़ी खरोंचें। यह एक लिपि है, पहचानो इसकी भाषा और इसके अर्थ को। जिन्हें तुम उन्नत उरोज कहते हो, प्यारा सा दिल है उनकी जड़ों के बीच। कंटीली झाड़ियों में फंसा हुआ घिरा है थुहर के कुंजों से, चारों ओर पसरा विकट अंचल, जंगल, जंगल में हिंसक जानवर, जहरीले सांप, गोहरे बिच्छू। इस कैनवास में उस लड़की की तस्वीर बनाओ कवि। अपना रंगीन चश्मा उतार कर देखो लड़की की गहरी नाभि के भीतर, पेट में भूख से सिकुड़ी उसकी आंतों को। सुनो उन आंतों का आर्तनाद और अभिव्यक्त करने के लिए तलाशो कुछ शब्द अपनी भाषा में।